Have you ever wondered what romance looked like before dating apps? Could you imagine a world where marriages were political alliances, and yet people still yearned for true love? What if I told you that our modern notions of romance were actually born in the Middle Ages? The medieval period might conjure images of plague knights and castles, but beneath the surface of arranged marriages and social hierarchies existed intricate and surprising ideas about love. These concepts continue to influence how we view relationships today, although we might not realize their ancient origins. Number 5. Divine love. When God was the ultimate relationship goal, did you know that for many medieval people, the most perfect form of love wasn't between humans at all? The concept of divine love dominated medieval thinking about relationships. For those living in the Middle Ages, particularly those in religious orders, the ultimate love affair was with God Himself. This idea of divine love wasn't just reserved for monks and nuns secluded in monasteries. Even regular medieval folks understood human love as a reflection of God's love. Religious texts and sermons frequently described Christ as a bridegroom and the church, or an individual soul, as His bride. This metaphor created a powerful template for how people understood love. Bernard of Clairvaux, an influential 12th century abbot, wrote extensively about this spiritual love. In his sermons on the Song of Songs, a biblical text filled with sensual imagery, Bernard transformed what appears to be erotic poetry into a divine allegory. He described the soul's yearning for God using intensely passionate language that would make modern romance novelists blush. For women in particular, religious devotion offered a form of agency otherwise unavailable in medieval society. Female mystics like Hildegard of Bingen and Julian of Norwich described their relationship with God in surprisingly intimate terms. Their writings reveal experiences of divine union that combined spiritual ecstasy with deeply personal connection. The visual art of the period reinforces this focus on divine love. Paintings depicted Christ as a loving, sometimes almost romantic figure. The Sacred Heart imagery, showing Jesus offering His heart, often surrounded by flames, symbolized this divine love connection available to all believers. Even marriage itself was understood primarily as a sacrament, a visible sign of God's invisible grace. The union between husband and wife was supposed to mirror the loving relationship between Christ and His church. This gave medieval marriages a spiritual dimension that extended beyond mere social contracts or romantic feelings. For the medieval mind, human love at its best was always pointing toward something higher. Passionate feelings weren't meant to end with another person, but to elevate one's thoughts toward God. This created a fascinating dynamic where human relationships were simultaneously valued and viewed as stepping stones to a greater divine connection. Number 4. Courtly love. The original forbidden romance. Have you ever been attracted to someone you couldn't have? The medieval period elevated this experience into an elaborate social game through what scholars now call courtly love. Emerging in the courts of southern France during the 12th century, this cultural phenomenon created a framework for passionate love affairs that existed outside of marriage. Courtly love told stories of noble knights who fell desperately in love with unattainable ladies, often the wives of their lords. What made this concept revolutionary was that it celebrated a form of love based on desire and emotional connection rather than the practical considerations that dominated medieval marriages. The troubadours, medieval poet-musicians, spread these ideas through love songs that still influence our romantic music today. These wandering artists performed elaborate compositions praising the beauty and virtue of noble ladies, describing the exquisite suffering of unrequited love. The language of pining, yearning, and lovesickness that fills modern pop songs has direct roots in these medieval performances. Andreas Capellanus wrote The Art of Courtly Love around 1185, offering what amounts to a medieval dating manual. He defined love as a certain inborn suffering derived from the sight of and excessive meditation upon the beauty of the opposite sex. This suffering wasn't seen as negative, but as ennobling. It made you a better person. The lover would undertake great deeds, improve himself morally and socially, all to be worthy of his beloved's attention. What's particularly fascinating about courtly love is that physical consummation wasn't necessarily the goal. In many courtly love stories, the love remained unconsummated. It was the longing itself, the emotional intensity of desire, that was valued. This created an interesting paradox where adulterous thoughts were celebrated in literature, while actual adultery remained severely punished in reality. The famous story of Lancelot and Guinevere embodied these courtly love ideals. Lancelot, Arthur's greatest knight, falls desperately in love with Queen Guinevere. Their forbidden love is portrayed with sympathy despite its destructive consequences. Chrétien de Troyes, the Knight of the Cart, shows Lancelot willingly enduring humiliation by riding in a cart, normally reserved for criminals, just for a chance to see Guinevere. For medieval aristocrats, courtly love offered an emotional escape from marriages that were primarily political alliances. It created a separate sphere where romantic feelings could be expressed and celebrated. Some historians argue that courtly love represented a form of resistance against the Church's strict control over sexuality, creating space for emotional experiences outside religious frameworks. The influence of courtly love on our modern conception of romance cannot be overstated. The idea that true love involves suffering, obstacles, and emotional intensity traces directly back to these medieval narratives. When we idealize the passionate pursuit of someone who seems out of reach, we're channeling these courtly love traditions, whether we realize it or not. Number 3. Chaste marriage. When saying, "I don't," was relationship goals. Would you believe that some of the most celebrated marriages in medieval literature weren't consummated at all? For a society that placed enormous importance on producing heirs, medieval culture maintained a fascinating counter-narrative celebrating marriages where couples mutually agreed to live as brother and sister rather than as husband and wife. These chaste marriages, or spiritual marriages, appear frequently in saints' lives and religious literature. The story of Saint Cecilia, who convinced her husband, Valerian, to respect her vow of virginity on their wedding night, was particularly popular. According to legend, an angel appeared to reward their commitment to chastity. Far from being considered a failure, their unconsummated union was presented as spiritually superior. Emperor Henry II and his wife, Cunegunda, were celebrated for supposedly maintaining a chaste marriage throughout their lives. After their deaths, they were both canonized as saints, with their sexual restraint considered evidence of exceptional holiness. Their story was retold throughout the medieval period as an exemplar of ideal Christian marriage. The Purgatory of St. Patrick, a medieval text from the 12th century, includes a married couple living chastely together. Their continental bed had a sword placed between them, a powerful visual symbol of their commitment to physical separation that later appeared in the Arthurian tale of Tristan and Isolde. This celebration of marital chastity reflected the complex and sometimes contradictory medieval attitudes toward sexuality. While the Church recognized marital sex as good for procreation, complete sexual abstinence was often portrayed as spiritually superior. The Virgin Mary and Joseph's relationship served as the ultimate model, a marriage defined by spiritual connection rather than physical union. For medieval people, particularly those influenced by ascetic religious ideals, controlling physical desires demonstrated spiritual strength. A chaste marriage Tokaide couples shared commitment to prioritizing spiritual goods over bodily pleasures. Rather than seeing this as a denial, medieval writers portrayed it as a positive choice that freed both partners to focus on divine love. Women, in particular, might have found the concept of chaste marriage appealing, as it offered protection from the physical dangers of repeated pregnancies in an era with high maternal mortality. For noble women who had already provided heirs to their husband's line, a later life transition to a chaste marriage could provide a respectable path to greater religious devotion. These spiritual partnerships challenged the procreative focus of medieval marriage while remaining within approved religious frameworks. They created space for intimate emotional bonds between men and women that weren't primarily sexual, offering an alternative vision of partnership focused on shared spiritual goals rather than physical union or dynastic concerns. Number 2. Arranged marriages. Finding love after I do. Have you ever thought about falling in love with someone after marrying them? For medieval people, particularly among the nobility, this wasn't just possible. It was the expected order of events. Marriage came first, organized by families for political, economic, or social advantage, with love hopefully developing afterward. Medieval marriage was primarily an economic and social institution rather than a romantic one. For noble families, marriages created crucial alliances, merged properties, and secured political connections. For commoners, marriages joined economic resources and labor power. The involvement of parents and extended family wasn't seen as interference, but as essential guidance. The Church gradually established its authority over marriage during the medieval period, eventually making it a sacrament in the 12th century. While consent of both parties became technically required, this didn't necessarily mean freedom of choice, especially for women. A daughter might consent to a marriage arranged entirely by her family, with little practical ability to refuse. What's fascinating is that, despite these pragmatic beginnings, medieval culture recognized the importance of affection developing between spouses. The medieval marriage liturgy included prayers asking God to grant the couple mutual love. Advice literature encouraged spouses to cultivate positive feelings for one another, suggesting that even arranged marriages should evolve into affectionate partnerships. Marjorie Kempe, who left behind the only known autobiography by an English medieval woman, describes her initially difficult marriage, transforming into a more spiritual partnership later in life. Though married to satisfy family expectations, she negotiated a new arrangement with her husband after bearing 14 children, convincing him to live chastely while maintaining their household partnership. The letters between Margaret and John Paston, preserved from 15th century England, show a businesslike marriage, gradually developing genuine affection. Their correspondence mixes practical household management with warm expressions of concern for each other's well-being, noting how medieval couples could blend pragmatic partnership with emotional connection. For peasants and townspeople, who made up the vast majority of medieval society, marriage choices might have included more personal preference, though economic considerations remained paramount. Couples needed compatible skills and resources to maintain their livelihood. While romantic love wasn't the starting point, working partnerships often developed into genuine attachments. Medieval literature reflects this reality. While courtly romances celebrated passionate love outside marriage, other genres like exempla, moral tales, and conduct books promoted affectionate marriage as an achievable ideal. The enormously popular 15 Joys of Marriage, despite its satirical elements, assumes that married couples should develop fond feelings for each other, even if the match was arranged for practical reasons. This medieval approach presents an interesting counterpoint to modern marriage expectations, where we typically expect intense romantic love to precede marriage. Medieval culture saw affection as something that could and should grow within the married state. This gave couples a lifetime to develop connection rather than expecting perfect emotional compatibility from the start. Number 1. Passionate love. When desire was considered a medical condition, did you know that falling madly in love was once considered a legitimate illness? Medieval physicians actually diagnosed passionate love as a medical condition with physical symptoms, treatments, and potentially fatal consequences if left uncured. This condition, known as amor hereus or lovesickness, appears throughout medieval medical texts. Constantine the African, an 11th century medical writer, described how an intense fixation on the beloved could cause physical symptoms including sunken eyes, pale complexion, insomnia, loss of appetite, increased pulse, and irregular breathing. If untreated, severe cases could lead to melancholy, madness, or even death. The supposed physiology behind this condition reveals fascinating insights into medieval understanding of emotions. Medical authorities believed that when a person saw someone attractive, the image would imprint itself on their mind. Excessive contemplation of this image would heat the blood around the heart, potentially damaging the rational faculties. The brain, attempting to cool itself, would dry out, leading to physical deterioration. Lovesickness wasn't just a literary device, it was documented in medical case studies. Bernard de Gordon, a prominent 13th century physician, recorded treating patients suffering from this condition. One of his cases involved a scholar rendered physically ill by his obsessive love for a noblewoman he could never marry, puting how social barriers intensified the medical symptoms. The recommended treatments reveal how medieval culture approached passionate love. Physicians frequently prescribed distraction through travel, exercise, or engaging conversations. They might recommend focusing on the beloved's flaws to break the idealized image, causing the obsession. For severe cases, consolation from friends, music therapy, and even carefully managed sexual release might be prescribed to rebalance the affected humor. Literary texts reinforced this medicalized understanding of love. In Chaucer's The Knight's Tale, Arcite and Palamon both suffer physical lovesickness after glimpsing Emily from their prison window. Their symptoms, insomnia, wasting away, constant sighing, mirror those in medical texts. Similarly, in Troilus and Chryside, Troilus becomes physically ill with love, requiring the intervention of friends to restore his health. What's particularly interesting is how gender influenced this diagnosis. While both men and women could suffer from lovesickness, it was primarily associated with educated men. The condition was linked to nobility and refinement. A lovesick person demonstrated their superior sensibility and capacity for elevated emotions. For aristocratic men, expressing lovesickness became almost fashionable, a way to demonstrate their refined nature. Women's experiences of passionate love received more complicated treatment. Medical authorities worried that women's supposedly weaker constitutions made them more vulnerable to love's dangerous effects. The story of Heloise's passionate love for Abelard was retold throughout the medieval period as both a cautionary tale and a celebrated example of extraordinary feminine devotion. This medical framing of love created a fascinating paradox in medieval culture. Passionate love was simultaneously celebrated in literature and pathologized in medicine. It was seen as both ennobling and dangerous, capable of inspiring great deeds while threatening physical and mental health. This tension reflects broader medieval ambivalence about intense emotions that seem to override rational control. When we describe being lovesick or crazy in love today, we're unconsciously echoing this medieval medical tradition that took passionate love's physical symptoms literally. The medieval understanding of lovesickness created a framework for experiencing and expressing emotions that continues to shape how we conceptualize intense romantic feelings centuries later. Have you ever wondered how these medieval ideas about love might still be influencing your own romantic expectations without you even realizing it?